Welcome to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me today is Lucy Beadnell. She is the Director of Advocacy for the ARC of Northern Virginia. She and I regularly chat on this show, and I like to check in with her to find out what is going on with the ARC. And right now, the ARC is dealing, like the rest of us are, with COVID-19 and how that has impacted how they deliver services to the disability community that they support. Thank you so much for being here, Lucy.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be joining you.
And I owe you some congratulations because the last time we spoke, it was January. And in July, you were actually honored by the Washington Business Journal as one of the 40 leaders under 40. And so I want to say congratulations because that is well deserved.
Thank you so much. It was a huge honor, and our family had a lot of fun celebrating in our living room.
Well, there you go. So that's a nice segue into how COVID has impacted what the ARC is doing right now.
So we were able to pivot to being essentially all digital services pretty quickly with lots of guest stars, such as this one here taking place in our work now. We have a number of programs. So our Special Needs Trust that helps people with disabilities save money without losing public benefits has moved to Zoom meetings. And our case management and our public guardianship program that checks in on people and makes sure that they have the services they need is doing FaceTime and live checking in on people at random intervals and doing scheduled meetings on Zoom and just really doing a great job. And for years, we had started doing all of our workshops and webinars and all those kinds of things with both an in-person and a digital component so that we could record it. We recognize that there's no one time we can pick for a workshop that worked for everybody. And so now we just remove the in-person component. We're just doing the virtual side of everything. So by and large, though we miss each other very much, and it's very strange not to be able to walk down the hall and problem solve, I think overall we've been able to pivot pretty quickly and effectively. And any service that we offered before, we have moved online.
Which is great because you offer a lot of different programs, and maybe some of our viewers aren't aware of the vast array of programs that you offer, including your transitions program, your transition points workshops, which is probably one of the workshops you just referenced. But you support the life cycle of people in the IDD community.
Yeah, absolutely. That's our mission from day one till the end of days. Whatever we can do to help people find what they need, navigate tricky situations, that's what we want to do. And so for many years, we had been, like everything else, trying to do more of that online. You know, we found out in Northern Virginia, and I guess anywhere, if you leave a phone message these days, we would get phone messages with 11 digits or 9 digits, or we would get messages that didn't make sense, or people had voicemails that were full. So for a long time, we've been trying to move that information and referral online. You can ask us a question anytime. I personally will retrieve it out and we'll go back to you. And so now we've moved essentially everything in that direction. We've always done a ton of advocacy, and a lot of that has been working with our state legislators on what we think is really important for people with disabilities, all the more important this year, as COVID has really rocked the disability community out of proportion with the population that's also had a really hard time. So the meetings that we used to hold in living rooms around a cup of coffee, we are holding over Zoom, and everyone brings their own coffee. And we're having families share their story with legislators that way. And I have to say, I had a lot of hesitancy about it. I feel like there's so much to be gleaned from sitting in someone's house, smelling the smells, looking at the pictures on their wall. But the move has been seamless, and the legislators have been great. Scheduling has been easier because we're not dealing with traffic and commuting times and travel planning and all those kinds of things. So in some ways, we've been able to do more. And our Transition Points program that you mentioned, which helps people at all the transitions in life, you know, getting a diagnosis, getting a job, a house, getting through school, aging, all those kinds of things. We're doing those workshops online. We used to have a 2-day, over 2 consecutive months, workshop on transitioning and kind of the big jump from school to adult world. And we're still doing that this year on the same timeline, but it's going to be on Zoom. So we have 45 families signed up for that, which is just about the number that we usually have for that kind of really intensive workshop. And we feel like we're really on target with what we're able to offer families. And some families love this. In fact, we've talked to some individuals who I'm working with on a grant project who told us they have never been more able to participate. And in their case, it was some families who have loved ones on the autism spectrum who learn best when they're able to get up and move around and make some noises and have some behaviors that other people find bothersome or distracting. And so as a result, they weren't able to finish high school. And now they're signing up for master's level classes because if they want to put themselves on mute and walk around the room, they can do it for the first time. And those digital opportunities have really opened big doors for them. It's cool stuff.
No kidding. I'm like stunned just to, you say it and people are like, well, yes, that totally makes sense because they're not bothering anybody, but they can do their behaviors and still learn. I'm like, this is amazing. Do you really foresee going forward in the time of normal that there will just be many, many things you continue to do virtually because they just make sense for people in your community?
I think it's hard to get away from it now, right? People have seen how more flexible and comfortable this is for them. As an example, every year in the fall, we run a big race as a fundraiser for us since we're a nonprofit. And this year, because we did a digital race where everyone runs the same distance and times themselves and enters their times, we had people literally all over the country participate. Folks who'd moved away, folks who had other ties to Northern Virginia, a loved one in Northern Virginia. And we thought, oh my goodness, like the sense of unity and folks posting videos of themselves running and posting their times and their big smiles on Facebook and chatting with other runners. It just brought about all this just like wonderful goodwill and connectedness that we had never thought that we would get if we didn't have that in-person race. So yeah, I just feel like we're going to learn to become a little more nimble and a little more digital going forward. I would hate to think we would get away from the in-person stuff entirely. But I think we've really learned that there's so many benefits to the digital side that we didn't see before. And now we're forced to see them.
Well, and so in every challenge, there are opportunities, right? And so your benefit breakfast in March, which was a quick pivot, it's like I was all geared up to go. And then it's like, well, we're not going. And I thought it was as I've said to you, I thought it was extremely well done. And it was seamless. It was beautifully done. People could log in, Tom and I, on different computers, logged into the benefits breakfast to hear from David from your board of directors and, of course, Connor and his mom, Sharon. And a lot of the outreach that ended up happening was used social media. And a lot of people contacted their community, their networks, their friends, their family. And it didn't matter where you lived because you weren't driving to a ballroom in a hotel. And so I think that there is opportunities for more people to participate in a different way. And so going forward, I think that there's going to be events that are a component or a composite of both in-person live things and also a component of online, maybe streaming things.
I don't think there's a way to get away from it. Like you said, we just found it enables so many more people to participate, to learn, to be engaged, and everyone is on social media these days. And so that's given all new opportunities for folks not just to participate from a distance, to really build relationships from a distance. And I just love it. I feel like the pool of potential volunteers and ideas and energy we have is exponentially larger. And I feel we have so much potential ahead of us. And I am excited to give this to all those people who felt like they couldn't come to a benefit breakfast before because it was across the country or because it was a block away, but they can't sit still for a benefit breakfast, or they can't easily get into the building, or their oxygen pump is really loud at a benefit breakfast. And great, we're all here together. It's all friends on deck.
I think it's terrific. And you're doing something else this year too. And you've probably done these before. But again, I've noticed because they're online, your candidate forums.
Yes.
So how's the participation been with these candidate forums?
It's been awesome. So historically speaking, we've done these candidate forums and we do them with local and state and federal legislators. So it's kind of all over the map. And for all these races, we're really just asking them about their thoughts on disability issues. We're a developmental disability organization, and it's not a debate, and it's not partisan, but it really is a chance for legislators to come, or candidates to really come on board and share what they know and what they want to know and their thoughts on things. And historically speaking, we've held them in our office or in the offices of some partners of ours. And one of the last ones I'll never forget, this spring, shortly before COVID, it was February, we held a primary forum for all the folks then running for the Democratic presidential primary. And every single Democratic presidential primary major campaign sent a representative. We had sitting Congress people in the room giving presentations. And when we advertised this forum to our families, the room had a capacity of 75. And inside of 24 hours, the room was booked. And when we held the forum live, we had 30 people in the room. And why is that? Because our families, more than any other, are subject to, we had a bad behavior today. The medical supplies we needed didn't come in the mail, so we can't leave the house. I'm on the phone arguing with them. The care attendant called out because they make $12 an hour and have no sick leave. I think that they're hightailing it to another job, right? And so all those kinds of things compounded. And though it was still a really successful event, I felt like, oh, we're missing all these families. And now we're doing these candidate forums exclusively online because of COVID. And we had over 200 families attend one of them. That's live. And we had 4,000 views after the fact on Facebook and on YouTube with the recording, right? I mean, this is really getting out there to people in a way that things never have before. And we are elated. And so are the candidates. That's
no kidding. Because you're right. There are barriers to people in the disability community actually getting places. It's just more difficult to get there in person to things like this. But you've got two more coming up. September 26th, you've got Mark Warner and Daniel Gade. And October 7th, you've got Jennifer Wexton and Alicia Andrews. And so Mark Warner's, this is a Senate race and it's a local congressional race. And you're right. It's not that it's a debate. It's hearing from these potential electeds, their commitment to the advocacy and the legislation that benefits your community.
That's exactly right. And they seem to love them. Any candidate with whom we've ever done one has said they want to come back and do another. With the Mark Warner and Daniel Gade race, we had people reaching out to us before we'd even started thinking about planning the forum, saying, we heard you all do these forums. We want to be a part of one. And that's exactly what we want. I mean, we want the Arc of Northern Virginia to be a hub, both for people with disabilities and their families to get information, but for candidates and elected officials to get information. We want them to come to our families to ask what's important and where do you want me to put our energy. And so it's been great to have more families be able to participate virtually and see them after the fact online. And I got a message today from a family saying, oh, at the same time of the Warner hearing, we're driving up from North Carolina, but I think I can stream it on my phone.
You know, and that's the other thing is that the technology, even with Zoom meetings, you can do it on your phone. I mean, I'm astonished at the ways we're figuring out to adapt these tools to wherever we are. You're meeting, well, you've always met people where they are, but this is at a whole new level because families are in their homes and they have just so much more opportunity to interact with the ARC, to interact with the events and the workshops that the ARC is doing. And when we get back from our break, Lucy, I want to talk some more about the ways in which you're meeting the needs of the community and help people, our viewers, understand how they can participate. And that might actually be just in simple ways like elevating the visibility of the work that you're doing. So everyone, please join us after the break.
When I was your age, I was just like you, fascinated by stars. But now I get to search for life in the universe. And who knows, maybe life is looking for us too.
So we're like aliens to them?
Yeah. Does anyone want to be a scientist now?
I do.
Awesome. We need more girls in STEM.
Maybe we can find aliens.
This is where you rise, this is where you shine, this is where you become the greatest of all time. History in the making. This is history in the making. History in the making.
Vote for your life. Even though there is so much against us, you will see me wearing a face covering.
And even with my face covered,
you will see me.
As a son.
As a friend to everyone I meet.
As a fighter for change.
As a woman who stands up for what I believe in.
So join me in wearing a face covering.
To help stop the spread of the coronavirus.
Because this is one small act of kindness that has the power to bring us all together.
Before we celebrate the freedom most Americans have, we must fight for the freedom all Americans deserve. Because all lives can't matter until Black lives matter.
Welcome back to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and today we're talking with Lucy Beadnell, who is the Director of Advocacy for the ARC of Northern Virginia. Lucy, I am so delighted to have you back on the show, and one of our favorite topics to talk about is actually the advocacy work you do around a legislative agenda. Whether that's at the federal level or it's the state level, you are always in there looking for the regulations, the budgetary resources that Virginia owes to the disability community. And so a lot of our viewers may or may not know, we are in a special session right now. So we never actually, the regular session ended the first week of March, but they've been called back twice. So tell us what you are watching during this special session.
Yeah, and I just have to emphasize, it is special in all the senses of the word, right? So incredibly unusual. It's very narrow in scope, as special sessions have to be. So really, they're supposed to just be working on issues related to the budget changes because of COVID-19. As you said, we passed the best budget for disability services I've ever seen in my more than decade at the ARC of Northern Virginia, and a week later froze it all. Right. So they're going back to figure out, how do we spend our very limited dollars, since COVID has demanded more funding for certain things and has diminished our resources to pay for them? And how do we tackle justice reform issues? And of course, that need was brought about by the protests that went around all around the country this spring, looking at big needs for justice reform. And that's an issue where ARCs and the disability community have been very concerned for many years. It's been years that we've tried to introduce legislation on the justice front, trying to get reforms, because people with developmental disabilities are significantly more likely to be victimized and significantly more likely to be arrested and incarcerated and accused than the typical population. So this is us when we talk about justice reform, and that goes triply so for people with disabilities who are people of color as well.
Absolutely. And so the unrest and the protests, and definitely the legislature right now is very much focused on criminal justice reform, and also looking at ways in which law enforcement needs to adapt to a reality that, quite frankly, as you said, has always been there. But until these protests, until the death of George Floyd, it just didn't get the attention that it deserved, unless you happen to be in a family like Breonna Taylor's, who was part of this horrific law enforcement overreach. So, I know that you work with your community. It's like the Black families will talk about how they have the talk with their sons, but this is even more difficult in the disability community to make people understand, especially young people understand, how to interact in a way with law enforcement that helps to better ensure their safety.
Yeah. And it's just a scary conversation. And over the last 6 months, I can't tell you how many people with disabilities and parents have reached out to me saying things like, I read Elijah McClain's last words about "I'm just different, and I know that's my son." Or, my son is 6'3" and 250 and a Black guy on the spectrum who hits. What are we going to do so he doesn't end up shot in the street, right? And how do these things not keep us all up at night? They just resonate in the deepest of ways. And so when we were asked, what do we want? I mean, a lot of it comes down to training, right? If officers are trained to both recognize that there may be a disability and not a substance use issue or a mental health issue or someone who's deliberately disobeying orders or those kinds of things, to recognize that in the first place and to slow things down, we save lives in the biggest of ways. So a lot of what we wanted was reform on training and funding and supports for training that included developmental disabilities, not just mental health needs, which is what people often think of. And certainly there's a need for both.
Definitely.
And the other piece that we've seen is we're impacted by many parts of our legal code in ways that I don't think people think about. So, for example, if you are someone on the spectrum, or someone who has cerebral palsy, or someone who has sensory sensitivity, someone who physically reacts in a way that may be unexpected, if an officer lays a hand on you and your hand flails back out because you're scared, you can be charged with felonious assault on an officer with a minimum 6-month sentence, right? And that's just not proportionate to the crime that we're looking at. If we talk about someone with CP who's spastic and someone comes near them and their arms flail out and they tap an officer, Should they go to jail for 6 months for that, right? We're just not in a good place. We saw lots of people with disabilities in situations where they have been arrested, they are in jail, and we hear things like they'd never understood what a plea deal meant. They were told that if they signed this, they could go home, and they believed it, and they signed it, and now they're in jail for years. And Virginia didn't have a great system set up for allowing things like people to get out for good behavior, like a parole system,
Right.
like sealing records on past crimes. If we find out, what was at play here is a disability and a miscommunication. And so all of the reforms that are happening this year are things in that vein. And that benefits everyone, but the disability community feels that very acutely. We are excited, we are relieved, and we are having parents breathe easier in their bed a little.
A little. And I know Scott Serval was one of the ones who was really a champion of the fact that what the regulations say about what is an assault on an officer is just not in keeping with the reality of what's happening. And so I love our Northern Virginia delegation. We have a lot of champions for the disability community who are always in there listening. And that's the important point that you made about the candidate forums too, is this is where electeds get the feedback about what the families are saying are their biggest challenges, their biggest worries, their biggest hurdles. So I'm glad to hear that the legislature is, in fact, the legislature is taking this up. But the budgetary issues are something entirely different. So your legislation got passed, but then was unallocated.
Yes, which is a new word in my vocabulary.
I know. I've heard it too. A lot of interviews I have right now, unallocated comes up. So yeah, I know what that means now myself.
So a lot of what the budget included is supports for what are called Medicaid waivers. So if you're a person with a disability and you are awarded a Medicaid waiver, it really means you have the opportunity to order off this secret menu. And it's menus for services like a nurse, someone to help you get out of bed, someone to help you to go to work, right? Very basic life supports and lifelines. And we have a waiting list of over 13,000 people in Virginia waiting for those waivers. So importantly, the budget funded a large portion of those people, about half of those who were waiting in crisis, which was very exciting. But it also recognized the issue that we've been seeing for years, which is families would call us and say, I waited 15 years for this stinking waiver, and I can't hire anyone with the money that it pays them. What am I supposed to do now? I was told this was the answer, the only answer, right? And so one of the things that the budget that it was originally passed did was raise some of those reimbursement rates. And we're still talking Medicaid dollars, but it was a raise of rates in recognition of the fact that our service providers, especially those in Northern Virginia, need to pay their staff enough to keep them on board. And waiver services don't pay for overtime, and they don't pay for benefits, and they don't pay for all kinds of other things. I mean, this really was bare minimum, kind of long overdue increase. And so though it's a budget increase, we are trying hard to remind everyone this was a budget increase that was like 15 years overdue. So this was not a 2020 bump up. This wasn't something that we were reaching for the stars on. This was covering a long time gap. And then, of course, the other piece is our service system has been turned upside down by COVID, right? People with disabilities, like everyone else, haven't left their house in 6 months. So all the people who were paid to support them in their employment endeavors and their daytime volunteering, et cetera, haven't been able to go to work for 6 months. And Medicaid, by and large, won't pay them for not going to work. And so their businesses are on the cusp of closing. And on the other end of the spectrum are residential providers who were used to having staff who could take people out, go places in groups, and not be there during working hours when the people with disabilities were going off to work, found themselves in a position where they needed more staff, smaller groups, PPE, and to be there 24/7 indefinitely. And we talked to one provider, the ARC of Greater Prince William, that has spent $368,000 in the last 6 months on PPE and overtime, trying to keep people safe in their homes. And none of that is reimbursed. So half of it is these things you froze in the budget have got to be unfrozen. We were already floundering. And the other piece is some of this federal money from the CARES Act needs to be directed toward the disability community, recognizing that our PPE expenses are way higher than those for the average community. The needs of our service providers have changed drastically. I mean, we've had people with disabilities who've had to be quarantined in their home for 14 days on a stretch. Well, then that's a whole other staff person you have to have working with them and touching no one else. And usually you can get them on board by paying them overtime that's not reimbursed, right? It's a challenging time to be a disability service provider.
And again, this is a community that's always had such incredible challenges to begin with. I mean, this is just a layer on top of how difficult it is just in a normal day, in a normal week, in a normal year. You know, and I can understand the budgetary challenges of trying to get from sub basement to basement. You know, I talked to John Horsch from SALT, who's like, we got a TANF increase, so it gets us to the basement. And we'll probably need 3 more legislative sessions to get us out of the basement to something that covers the actual, or begins to cover the actual needs of people who receive it.
That's exactly it. I mean, folks don't think often, for many folks with developmental disabilities, you got to recognize the unemployment rate is 80%.
Right.
So if you have a disability and you can't find a job, despite the ADA folks aren't willing to take a chance and hire you, then your income is $781 a month from Social Security. And I would love to see the budget of anyone in Northern Virginia who can make it on $781 a month with no extra supports, no services. I mean, come on. And these are folks who need significantly more help throughout the day to be successful, but can be successful and can have jobs when given opportunities. And I just really feel like we've set folks up for failure in so many regards. So unless we fund things like waivers and support staff and opportunities and protective equipment, I mean, I can't tell you how many families we've had who said, we thought we were in crisis before. We're too scared to allow staff into our house. We're medically compromised. We're way more vulnerable than most folks. So no one's come into our house to help. So I'm working my job and helping some of my kids with virtual school and helping my adult with full disability needs, full physical care or behavior needs. And I've never gotten a break in 6 months. And we talk to parents whose kids have real behavior needs, who say, I push my dresser in front of my door at night because my child has threatened to kill me, right? And that's not the norm, but these are the folks now we're saying, oh, sorry, you can never have a day off from this. We just want you to keep going with this indefinitely, and we're not going to pay you more, and we're not going to give you a break, and it's untenable.
It is untenable, but I'm glad that you at least have shared with us the experience that your families and your community is having. And I encourage people to go to the arcofnova.org to find out how they can better support your work. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Lucy.